Beta male wipes with paper. Alpha male wipes with water. Sigma male refuses to wipe at all and lets others deal with his scent to showcase dominance. Sigma. Beta male dodges the draft. Alpha male fights in the war. Sigma male saws off his own legs, gets put in a wheelchair, and then voluntarily fights in the war to give his enemies a fighting chance. Sigma. Beta male simps for women. Alpha male has women simp for him. Sigma male. What is a woman? Sigma, 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 sigma. If you're not earning at least $1 billion a week, you don't even deserve to breathe the same oxygen as someone like me. Look at these muscles. Look at them. Oh! Life is a game where there are winners and losers. So let me ask you, do you want to be a winner or a loser?
Do you see those weights there? You see those weights there? I bet you can't lift them. Bet you can't lift them.
Well, I bet I can lift them. I will lift them. I will prove you wrong. Lift the weights. Lift them. Lift them. Lift. Lift them. Lift them. Look at my muscles. Look at my six-pack. P-I-M-P. You jealous of me? You jealous of me, huh? Look at this. Pull. Pull. Yeah, look at that. Look at that. That's alpha male, sigma male strength. Maximum strength. If you sign up to my course for just $69 per second, I promise you that your bank account will look very different. Fast cars.
Yeah, yes, yes, yes.
Massive mansions.
Yes, yes, yes.
Ladies. Okay, so I want to start off this production with a bit of a weird story. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and me and a bunch of lads were having a chat on the Discord. Everything was fine and dandy, until, all of a sudden, a random lady joins the voice chat. She politely introduces herself by saying something innocent like,
"Hey guys!"
Whereby then, almost instantly, around half the lads just turned into what I can only describe as rabid animals, frothing at the mouth with rageful abuse. Shut up, bitch!
Who let you in here?
Who the hell is this?
Get out of here!
Ladies?
Get out of here!
Ladies?
Send nudes!
And I'm gonna be honest with you, I was quite taken aback. These chaps, who were completely calm and polite to one another just a few minutes ago, had suddenly just turned into these monsters. It was like a light switch. So I said, "Hey, why are you all being rude for no reason? Do you know her?" And they were like,
No, she's just a bitch.
and I'm like, "Well, how do you know that she's a bitch if you don't know her?" And they're like,
What the hell, Alex? I didn't take you for a white knight.
and I'm like, what? A preposterous claim. I mean, come on. Let's say there were 3 guys. The guy in the middle greets you by saying, "Hey, nice to meet you." The guy on the right says, "Hello, my queen, my goddess." And the guy on the left says,
Hey, you stupid bitch.
any rational person would surely identify that what the guy in the middle said is socially justified, but what the guy on the left and the guy on the right said is socially unjustified. Why? Because whereas the guy in the middle is just having a neutral tone, the guy on the right is being way too polite for no reason, and the guy on the left is being way too aggressive for no reason. Now, this is of course obvious to anyone with half a brain, but the problem with these lads, however, was that their perception on what was socially justified, and what wasn't, was seemingly completely messed up, whereby even the neutral tone seemed like white knight simp territory, as if they had had it beaten into them that being rude to the opposite gender, for no reason at all, was completely normal. But here's the thing, I noticed that it wasn't all of the guys present doing this. The age range present was around 18 to 35, and interestingly, I noticed that the guys in their 30s were completely calm. The guys in their 20s were a mixed bag, but the guys who were 18 and 19 were absolutely furious. It was as if the younger they were, the more outraged they were. And it was at this point that I understood what I was witnessing. I was witnessing the long prophesized masculine overcorrection. It's no secret that since the introduction of feminism, the once positive relations between men and women have been absolutely destroyed, at least in the Western world. Now, I'm not going to go into how, what, and why that is, as if you want to know that, I've made another masterful production on such already. But the bottom line is that Western society, especially in really gnarly places like Western Europe, just doesn't work for anyone anymore, and especially not for young men. In the Western world, there now comes a moment in almost every young man's life, usually from around 18 to 22, where you realise that everything you've ever been told has been a complete lie.
Men and women are exactly the same. It's okay for men to show emotion. Feminism is a good thing for everyone.
Bollocks, bollocks, and bollocks. For men, the graduation into adulthood is often a shocking but sobering reality check, and barring those who are wealthy, docile, or soyified beyond belief, most will henceforth undergo a process that I like to call the wake-up call. During the wake-up call, you become pissed and desperately seek solutions to free yourself and others from the scam of modern Western society. For me, when I had my wake-up call, the solution I conjured was of course religion. The idea being that because the Western world abandoned our religious values, we are now inevitably doomed to collapse, as we didn't realise that they were actually the bedrock of our civilization. Whereby after such a fall, we will then return back to a religious establishment, aka civilizational natural selection theory, of which I have no doubt will pose true. But the only reason I managed to come to such a conclusion was because when I had my wake-up call phase back in around 2013, religion was the most accessible solution available. But now, much later, this isn't true at all, as today, society has only continued its predicted decline further. And from such desperation, there have been numerous movements created that aim to scoop up young men during their wake-up call phase and indoctrinate them with the solutions they seek.
Look, come here, listen to me, right, listen to me, right. Are you listening to me, right? Listen to me. No, listen to me. No, listen, are you listening to me? Listen to me. Listen to me, right? Listen to me.
Now, of course, religion is still around, but it's often seen as too distant and long-term to fix anything. Shadowed by newer and more short-term movements, such as men's rights activism, MGTOW, inceldom, and hustle culture. Men's rights activism just being the male version of feminism, MGTOW promoting male isolationism by rejecting women entirely, inceldom being a very complex sociological reaction to sexlessness, and hustle culture promoting the grind to get better. But here's the kicker. One of these movements is not like the rest. Men's rights activism, MGTOW, and inceldom are what I like to call victimhood ideologies. They all present men, whether rightly or wrongly, as the victims of injustice, and that society must cater to them as per appropriate because they've been wronged. They all, however, tend to be quite disorganised, underground, and chaotic, with very few figures of note between them, tending to be rejected and even mocked by the vast majority of men, making them not much of a threat to the establishment at all. Hustle culture, on the other hand, is more of a conqueror's ideology. The idea being that while Western society is certainly rigged against men, it isn't going to fix itself, and that the only way to ascend out of such victimhood is to be the best you can possibly be in every way, to get on the grind and teach society a lesson. Now, there have been many hustle culture gurus out there on the internet, but by far the most prolific is of course Andrew Tate, who, for a time, was the most Googled man on the planet as a result of such efforts.
My unmatched perspicacity, coupled with sheer indefatigability, makes me a feared opponent in any realm of human endeavor.
But much to the surprise of the establishment, as seen with the explosive success of Tate & Co., the hustle culture actually tends to be received exceptionally well by men at large. And truly, it isn't really hard to understand why. Psychologically, victimhood rhetoric, such as the patriarchal myth that feminism promotes, is effective with a large share of women because women tend to have an innate biological desire towards being protected. Hence, the never-ending feminist grift, with the state, in this case, supposedly doing the protecting. But men, on the other hand, don't like to think of themselves as victims who need saving, for they have an innate biological desire to conquer, wanting to be seen as kings. This is why even the most scrawniest and nerdiest of men like to immerse themselves in simulated environments, such as video games, where they can live out such inner fantasies of conquest, usually against other men. In retrospect, of course the victimhood ideologies weren't going to tickle men's pickles. For what would be effective all along was not something that presented men as disempowered, but something that inspired men to become empowered. Which is exactly what Tate and Co. provide. The messaging is simple. Get ripped, get rich, and get rizzed. These messages of masculine conquest are almost completely suppressed in the neoliberal mainstream media, and many young men, especially those born after 1995, have likely grown up their entire young lives never hearing such empowering messages. Here's some facts for you. You have a growing number of young boys being raised by single mothers, whereby the vast majority of their teachers at school are women, with almost every societal institution purposely leaving them behind. Okay? Well then, is it any wonder why large swaths of young men are eating fanatically from the hand of the first actual pro-masculine role model they can find? No. No, it isn't. I mean, seriously, what does Joe Biden do for men? What does Rishi Sunak do for men? Or any of these other Western political puppets? Nothing! Of course young men flock to Andrew Tate. He's the only one talking to them. Much of such messages are very positive, forcing young men to look in the mirror and understand that no one is coming to help them unless they help themselves, and that they must take their fate into their own hands. But of course, there are also some negative messages, promoting greed, lust, bad attitudes, and questionable behaviour at large. And this is why I call it the masculine overcorrection, because masculinity has been so demonized over the last few decades that it was simply inevitable that when it became naturally sought after once again, that it would originally do so with a merciless bang by those who don't care about judgment. But this development has scared the neoliberal establishment like nothing else. Why? Because the neoliberals in charge of Western society purposely go out of their way to despise young men, because young men are by far the demographic that most threatens their power. As I've said many times before, it's young men who fight their phony wars. It's young men who maintain order. And it's ultimately young men who keep society going. If all young men one day decided to put an end to Western society, it would be over within 24 hours. And they know it. Hence, by keeping young men disempowered, demoralized, and distracted, neoliberalism can continue to reign supreme. Get fat, play video games, watch adult material, don't talk to women, work hard for your boss, and don't ever ask questions. These are the messages that young men are constantly told, and intentionally so. The establishment fears not the young woman, the old woman, or the old man, but only the young man. As controlling young men is the key to controlling civilizations at large, always and forever. Why? Because young men are blessed far more than any other demographic with testosterone, a hormone which makes you angrier, riskier, but also braver and more valiant. They fear this blessing. Men's rights activism, MGTOW, and inceldom? The establishment didn't fear these movements, as after all, they only go on in practice to make men more feminine, isolated, and alone, which is exactly what they want. But a series of rising prominent figures telling young men to not be disempowered but empowered, to not be demoralized but motivated, and to not be distracted but focused, well, that was simply too much for them to bear. The destruction of the male spirit is foundational to the continuation of neoliberalism, hence why it is always prioritised. Unsurprisingly then, when faced with the masculine overcorrection, the neoliberals first responded by how they always do: censor. Pretty much all major social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and before Musk took it over, Twitter, were all under neoliberal control. And as such, all it took was a few quick phone calls, and Tate and Co. were vanished like they never existed. But of course, that wasn't going to work, as the idea that just because you have the power to censor someone means that you should is ridiculous, and if anything, only backfires, as it proves that the neoliberal establishment fears their messages, which only makes societal outcasts want to seek them even further. Thus, they tried their second tactic: shaming. Launching psyops aimed at young men via mainstream media and corrupted message boards such as Reddit, trying to warp the perception amongst young men to make it seem like those who like Tate and Co. are just a small minority, and that anyone who even dared to follow one word of their advice was doomed to failure. But because a psyop can only really be successful if it's not obvious that it's untrue, this obviously failed too, as Tate is blatantly massively popular, especially with young men. Hence why he was censored in the first place, as he, or more what he was saying, was feared. Thus, they tried their third and final tactic, which was imprisonment. Pulling some strings, they managed to put Tate and his brother in prison, as a means of reputational destruction. However, not even this would work, as this only made Tate seem like a martyr, who, rather than being a criminal, was instead being criminalized by the establishment. Or, as he likes to put it, the Matrix. Essentially, every attempt the neoliberals made to silence this newfound masculine overcorrection has proven to be a failure. They simply just don't understand what's actually going on. They're losing control of young men, and they're scared. I did a poll on Twitter where I said, "You're an able-bodied young man of military age. If World War III broke out, would you fight on behalf of your country?" 6 hours into the poll, just 12% of people said yes, they'd volunteer. 31% said that it depends, only if they were drafted, whereas a staggering 57%, a majority, said that they flat out never would, even if they were drafted. And yeah, I'd never die for Britain, ever. The Britain of the past, definitely. But whatever the hell this is, no chance. And this really proves my point. The establishment thought that men would simply forever accept this new submissive, overly feminine failing society. But that was always only going to be temporary. It's clear that there is a masculine overcorrection that has been underway arguably since the 2010s, but as it was mostly via the victimhood ideologies, it was, as stated earlier, very ineffective. Because masculinity isn't about being a whiny victim. But now, in the 2020s, with the rise of the hustle culture, the masculine overcorrection has become not just blatantly observable, but successful. Because it empowers men to understand their innate strengths and to reject a status quo that hates them. And it is the youth who are seemingly leading such a movement forwards. Young men are starting to realize en masse that if they continue to follow the rules of the progressive West, as past generations have done for decades now, then they will end up just as miserable as most middle-aged men are today. And while some generations, such as the millennials, are all but corrupted, the Zoomers and the upcoming Generation Alpha are almost certainly going to pose a threat to neoliberalism. 20 years ago, just 43% of United States 12th grade boys identified as conservative. But today, this number has rose to a staggering 65%. This is not a coincidence. Originally, I laughed at the legions of young men desperately trying to imitate Tate, wearing sunglasses, having the same attitude, and trying to live the same lifestyle. But you know something? Maybe it's a good thing. Because honestly, I'd rather have the next generation of men reach 30 with strong ambitions, rather than end up balding, emasculated, and playing Lego Star Wars on their PS5 at 2:30 in the morning, like so many men do today. If I had a son, I'd honestly rather him watch Andrew Tate than the myriad of anti-male garbage that's in the mainstream media. And that's pretty sad. Yes, it's annoying to see every young man under the sun with a Patrick Bateman profile picture, trying their best to be the stone-cold Sigma male that they formulated in their heads. But kind of like those Discord chaps I spoke of earlier, they aren't really bad lads, they're confused lads, trying to prove themselves to the world by any means necessary, even by being rude to complete strangers, and often women. They are simply overcorrecting, because society is likewise hostile to them. And while the Western media would rather instead focus on the subsequent misogyny that spawns from such infantile outlooks, the fact they never bother to address why so many young men are acting in such ways in the first place only confirms that this may well be an unfortunate necessary lesson. The rise of Andrew Tate is actually quite a poetic story, if you really think about it. A man who made his money via a cam business, exploiting both the newly acceptable and often celebrated objectification of women, as well as the lowly desperate men who would pay to see them. A business that is ironically only possible to exist in a feminist society that celebrates such debauchery. Poetic. For months I went back and forth on whether or not Tate & Co were good figures or bad figures, but ultimately I came to the conclusion that while not everything they say and do is accurate or commendable, I believe it would be unwise for conservative figures to moralistically dismiss them. As while such figures aren't perfect or ideal, sometimes societies need an overcorrection of behaviour in order to restore itself back to normality. The number one issue with conservatives is in the name. Conservative. Newsflash, there's nothing left to conserve. Conservatives need to cease this farce that you have to be this ultra-moralistic Mr. Nice Guy who's always above the chaos. As conservatism, whether you like it or not, is now the counterculture, and in order to become the status quo again, there must be a cultural revolution. And unfortunately, revolutions are never orderly. Every single man in the Western world must be propagated with the truth of the evils of neoliberalism, by any means necessary. This is a society that hates you, and you must fight it. And if figures like Tate & Co are necessary to facilitate that change, then I say let them. Feminists, progressives, and the new left at large have, after all, had many a decade to heed the gentle warnings provided by people who could see this coming a mile away. But such words always fell on deaf ears, too busy being utopianistically convinced that the future is female and all other such nonsense. Of course, we cannot tolerate the promotion of decadent behaviour, and should always try to push society into a more morally religious direction. The hustle culture certainly does not provide appropriate solutions to the problems of our time, but it definitely does awaken people, especially young men, to such problems in the first place. As such, if an overcorrection is really the only way that Western society can learn its lesson, then I say, so be it.